James Gunn, co-CEO of DC Studios. The DCU is making the rounds, talking about all the projects that they've got lined up. They announced 5 movies and 5 television projects this week, and it turns out these films are all inspired by comic books. And today we're going to talk about that, and you can see right up front, just from the comic book runs that James Gunn mentions, inspiring the characters in the DCU, he is an enormous fan of the British invasion of DC Comics, specifically with Vertigo. I don't think these are going to be literal interpretations of most of these stories, but there will be inspirations, and I do want to talk about this. Grant Morrison had a 7-year run with The Dark Knight that will now inspire the brave and the bold. Perhaps the most influential moments from the series will come from his Batman and Son era, which finally introduced Bruce Wayne's son, Damian, into the main continuity. Morrison's comics also included the Batman RIP storyline, which saw the Dark Knight believed to be dead. During this time, when Wayne was thought to be gone, certain members of the Bat family pushed to become the next Batman, with the mantle eventually going to Dick Grayson. I have severe doubts that we're going to see Bruce Wayne, despite being the star of the Batman, actually be dead in the DCU, or thought to be dead, at least initially, and replaced by Dick Grayson. So I do not believe this will be a literal interpretation of Grant Morrison's run, especially when you get to the Batman and Robin series, which is Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne, which is absolutely fantastic. As far as his interpretation of Batman, it is not my favorite. He introduced, or really fully developed, the Bat God. Bruce Wayne no longer solves crimes as the world's greatest detective. In fact, crimes just melt away in front of him because he's the world's greatest detective, and he never actually has to do any work anymore. That's kind of what Grant Morrison did to the Batman, and that's kind of his legacy with the character. So I do not like that aspect. Here's my thing. Grant Morrison's a really good writer, and he's done some amazing stuff, specifically Animal Man. If you've never read Animal Man, that's the best work he's ever done in his career. But he doesn't even have one of the 5 best Batman runs of all time. Like, there are much better Batman runs out there. Specifically, if they want to get into Damian Wayne and Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul and the League of Assassins and all that stuff, just go back to the Denny O'Neil stuff and start there and move towards Damian Wayne. I think starting out with Damian Wayne as Robin, you've got a New 52 situation all over again, because the Superman in this universe is supposed to be really young. Like, it doesn't make sense that he would have rolled through 4 or 5 Robins at that point. And trying to get the entire Bat family into a movie, it's going to be really difficult. It's hard enough to feature Batman with the Robin, with Gotham, with Commissioner Gordon, with Alfred, the Batmobile, and all the other cool characters that you just need to do a Batman and Robin story. But now we're going to throw in Nightwing, Red Hood, Batgirl, the other Batgirl. Spoilers, oh, and where does Tim Drake fit in all of this? Oh, are we going to have Lucius Fox? How about the Therapist? How many characters from the Bat family can you fit into a movie? I think if you wanted to do Bat family stuff, a TV show was probably the way to do it, because a lot of these characters aren't really going to get spotlighted right. You're not going to have a really good interpretation, and there's probably a lot of people out there who have been waiting to see a Jason Todd moment in a movie, and he's probably not going to get a lot of screen time. You know what I mean? I feel like they should have moved towards that rather than starting at that moment. As far as Brave and the Bold, if you're a Brave and the Bold fan, I hate to break it to you, and obviously James Gunn confirms this, we're not getting Brave and the Bold stories. Brave and the Bold are just team-up books featuring Batman and another character in DC Comics. I think they just wanted another title that wasn't Dark Knight or Batman associated with characters, so they're going to call it Brave and the Bold. But it's an interesting place to start. Grant Morrison does have a very good Batman run, and if you're hell-bent on having Damian Wayne in the DCU, this is where you have to start. Speaking of Grant Morrison, they're also looking to him for inspiration for Superman. All-Star Superman may be among the Man of Steel's most famous runs ever, and now it seems placed to influence Superman legacy. This story saw an older Superman dying due to overexposure to the sun, and with the DCU Superman expected to be younger, its influence will likely be strictly in tone. Writer Grant Morrison's approach to the 12-issue series was to create a new and universal take on Superman without redoing origin stories or unpacking classic narratives, while also offering a total update, rehaul, and refit. Advice Gunn will likely be taking closely on board to reinvent the character. I'll be honest, All-Star Superman does not reinvent Superman. In fact, it's a very, very traditional take on the character. Now, it is an original story. It doesn't sound like we're going to be getting that, so I would say that Grant Morrison's take on Superman is what we will get in Superman Legacy. We will not be getting the story. If I was to do anything, and All-Star Superman is absolutely brilliant. If you like Superman, you will absolutely love that story. I probably would have went with Man of Steel from John Byrne. That really reinvented the character and really modernized Clark Kent from being a bumbling idiot that you could never see Lois Lane ever being attracted to being like a really full-fledged hero that, when he was Clark Kent, he also had a lot of gravitas and stuff like that. The other one, I guess, would be Superman Birthright from Mark Waid, which I don't think is nearly as good as Man of Steel, but a lot of people out there would say that's the better Superman origin story. I absolutely disagree with that. So there are a couple of other places that he could have gone that I think probably would have been better inspirations, where he could have actually mined a little bit of story out of this, because I think telling his own James Gunn Superman story inspired by the tone of All-Star Superman probably doesn't sound all that good. If he was really smart, he just would have went back to Marv Wolfman's Man and Superman, which only came out like 3 or 4 years ago. And it was absolutely brilliant. A wonderful take on a young Superman in Metropolis trying to make his way. So there are certainly worse inspirations to have for Superman. I will tell you right now, based on All-Star Superman, Grant Morrison loves the character, and he really feels like Superman's important. But if you go read Action Comics, I would tell you Grant Morrison doesn't like Superman. So he definitely picked the better Grant Morrison Superman run on that one. As far as the other big Vertigo writer, Swamp Thing is going to be inspired by Alan Moore. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing threw aside much of the character's past to turn him into a true monster and lean into the horror aspects, something the DC flick is soon expected to do, and it may have already found the director to do so. There are rumors that Nick Mangold, who directed Logan and obviously a lot of other movies, is being courted to direct the Swamp Thing movie. Logan's a really good movie. Nick Mangold's done some good stuff. I think it's an interesting choice. I probably would have went with like David Fincher or maybe James Wan, somebody like that. But Nick Mangold is an interesting director, and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, in my opinion, is the second greatest comic book story ever told. If you've never read Saga of the Swamp Thing, I'm sorry. You missed out on one of the greatest comic book stories of all time. And Alan Moore absolutely discards pretty much everything Lynn Wein had done up to that point. It's really an exploration of humanity once Alec Holland finds out the truth about what Swamp Thing is and what he really is, and can he live with himself, and did he truly ever love this woman, and all this kind of really stuff. And it's very, very introspective. Can you even make this into a movie? You're going to get the Floronic Man and all that kind of stuff. It could be very trippy and very interesting. It's a bold choice. If you're going to be inspired to make a Swamp Thing movie, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is the place to start. But it could be difficult to translate into a movie. But my, oh my, that is a hot comic book. If you've never read that, I cannot stress enough. You should go and read it today. Go pick up your copy of Saga of the Swamp Thing, Volume 1, and you are going to be very, very happy that you did so. So that's an absolutely brilliant book and a good place to start. But I do think it's going to be very difficult to adapt to a movie. They probably should have just done this as a television show, which is unfortunate because the first season of Swamp Thing on HBO Max, or was it DC Universe or whatever it was at the time, was actually pretty damn good. But I guess there was a clerical error, and they ended up being charged like an extra $20 million in the production. They had to cancel the second season. But if you haven't watched first season of Swamp Thing, you'll see what I mean, why that's going to be a difficult movie to make. Like, it almost doesn't work as a TV show, I would say, but it's really good. It's very, very interesting stuff. As far as The Authority, another British influence, Warren Ellis saw a team of heroes rise from the ashes of the government-controlled team Stormwatch to defend Earth from global threat. But this new group now operated outside the bounds of government control, and as their name implies, now answer to their own authority. This take on the team had a drastically different approach to crime fighting from other superhero teams, having a more cynical approach to the world. The Authority was violent and brutal, doing things as they pleased. When The Authority came out, it was absolutely like mind-blowing stuff. You really hadn't seen a lot of superhero stuff at the time like The Authority. The unfortunate part is, this is 2023, and we've seen a lot of stuff like The Authority, most notably The Boys. We've also had The Watchmen in movies and on television, which has very similar themes and atmosphere to The Authority. Less action, though, in The Watchmen. There's certainly a lot more action and brutality in The Authority, so this is kind of a wild card. If you're going to make an Authority movie, you go to the Warren Ellis run. It's one of the better runs of all time. It's not in my top 5, but it's absolutely flirting with jumping in there. And I know Doc is going to be very excited to hear that. The Authority is absolutely the comic book itself is absolutely worth putting on the big screen. It's worth taking the chance. I just think they're going about it wrong, tying it into the DCU, but that's probably going to blow some minds. And I don't know, can you make this PG? That's one of the things I'm noticing about this. Is the DCU supposed to be competing with the MCU? Because outside of All-Star Superman, a lot of this stuff isn't kid-friendly. Like, the MCU is absolutely a family-friendly environment. You know, they do have, like, the Deadpool movie coming up or whatever, which will be a bit of an aberration, obviously one of those legacy projects from Fox or whatever, but it feels like they might be excluding kids with the direction that they're going with the DCU. And I don't think without the entire family audience, you can actually compete with the MCU. That's just one of my observations on this. I think they might be going a little too dark with some of these projects. The final project is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. James Gunn was clear from the get-go that Superman, Woman of Tomorrow would be inspired by Tom King's 2021-2022 run of the same name. In fact, King himself has even been closely involved in some of the early writing work at DC Studios. The unique sci-fi take on Supergirl features Kara Zor-El, who, unlike her cousin Kal-El, grew up on a chunk of Krypton and spent the early years of her life watching everyone around her perish in terrible ways. A lot of people have been bagging on Tom King, I guess, in Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, but it's probably the best thing he's written since Swamp Thing Winter Special, like 5 or 6 years ago. It's actually pretty good. The problem is it's an absolute ripoff of True Grit. It's scene for scene, like from the movie in the book itself. It's already been a novel. It's already been a movie. It's already been a reboot, and there's already been a sequel to the first movie. And I just don't think Kara Zor-El and Rooster Cogburn have much in common. Trying to make her edgy by making her this like ruthless cowboy character. This isn't even Tom King's story. They should be paying the writer of True Grit, not Tom King, for this. Although having Tom King in the DC writer's room is a terrible mistake for the DCU, but as a comic book fan, I'm kind of excited about this. Maybe one or two of these projects takes off, and he doesn't have time to write comic books anymore, and then DC Comics are in a better place. I'd rather read good comic books than watch good movies based on comic books I like. That's just who I am because I'm a comic book fan first. So whatever gets Tom King away from DC Comics, I think is a good thing. But if you're going to adapt a Tom King work of the last 5 years, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow is the place to start, but it's not his work. It's an absolute ripoff of True Grit, which is one of the greatest American novels of all time. Like, okay, great. Not to mention the fact that that's actually not Kara Zor-El. That's not Supergirl. It's just some weird version of it. Obviously, they could have tried to make Heroes in Crisis or adapt Tom King's Batman run, which would be really big mistakes. So at least they took the best work that he made, but it's a ripoff. It's not even original work. So that is very interesting stuff. In my opinion, the key to all of this is Superman. Without a functioning Superman, you cannot have a functioning DCU. They are going to some real inspiration in All-Star Superman. Not the greatest story for a movie, but the version of Superman you get, the essence of the character is absolutely there if that's what's inspiring it. I think James Gunn is a bad choice for that, but that's a conversation for another day. And I think Superman and other strong male role models in comic books are absolutely worth fighting for. DC Comics, Marvel Comics have gone out of their way to destroy these characters. Hopefully, if they're basing this on All-Star Superman, James Gunn and the rest of the DCU can begin to turn the tide, and maybe we can get some good Superman again. If you haven't seen the video here, there's also a link in the video description.